Welcome you all in this third lecture in the series of lectures on clinical utility of the Wessler Adult Intelligence Scale 4th edition. In the previous two lectures, I covered two scales, that is verbal comprehension scales, the similarities, vocabulary information, the core subtest of the verbal comprehension scale, and supplemental subtest comprehension. In the second lecture, I covered perceptual reasoning scale, the three core tests, that is block design, matrix reasoning, and visual puzzles, and two supplemental tests, picture completion, figure weights, as well as the working memory scale, the two core subtests, that are digit span and arithmetic, letter number sequencing as supplemental subtests. In this lecture series, I have followed a presentation style in which I present the description and example items of each of the subtests of the various scales of WAIS-IV, followed by what these test measures, the measure cognitive abilities or functions reflected or measured by these subtests, followed by the factors that can influence the test score performance, both clinical as well as non-clinical or extra-clinical factors that we should take into consideration while interpreting the test scores for clinical purpose, followed by the clinical consideration using both quantitative as well as qualitative approach. In this third lecture series, I will cover the fourth scale, that is processing speed scale, which consists of three subtests, two core subtests, namely the symbol search and coding, and one supplemental subtest, cancellation, which serves as a supplemental test for individuals aged between 16 to 69 years. For older participants, this test cannot be used as substitute of the core subtest. However, for individuals within the age of 16 to 69 years, if the test is spoiled or invalidated due to some reason, the supplemental subtest cancellation can be used. Following the same pattern, same style, I will describe each of the subtests with example items wherever possible, followed by what they measure and the factors influencing them, along with the clinical utility or consideration. So the first subtest of processing speed scale or processing speed index is symbol search. In this test, the participants are presented with two target symbols within a row of symbols, and then it is followed by a set of 5 additional search symbols, and the task is to identify whether the target symbols are present in the search group or not. Individuals are allowed to use pencil to mark either the matching symbol, those symbols which are present in the set of 5 additional symbols, they mark those symbols, or a no box. There is yes and no box. If the symbol is not present, they tick on the no box to indicate that the symbol is not present. And for this timed task, they have 120 seconds to complete as many rows as possible. So task is simple, but the time is limited. So the major focus is on speed of performance. This is one example. Check whether either of the two symbols on the right. So you can see the two symbols. This is less than symbol and this symbol. These two symbols on the right matches any of the symbols on the left. And here you can see five symbols. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these two symbols, if you see carefully, these symbols are not present. So participants has marked the no box. Here, these two symbols has to be matched from this five symbol, and none of these symbols are present, but participant has marked this symbol as present. So this is an error made by the participant. In this series, there are two symbols. This is greater than, and you can see that greater than is present. So he has marked greater than. This is the correct response. Again, here the two symbols, these are the two target symbols, and as you can see, the inverted U or this symbol is not present. So the respondent has correctly marked the no box. So this is the task. This is the symbol search task. The participants are provided with two target symbols in a row, and they are kept at the right side, and towards their left there are five symbols, and they have to search the symbols and tick the symbols if they are present, otherwise tick the no box, and they have to do as many rows as possible within 120 seconds. This symbol search basically measures the visuomotor processing speed. The response is a motor response. You are putting a tick mark, and the task is visual in nature. So it is basically a visuomotor processing speed task. Short-term visual memory is also involved because you have to retain in your short-term memory the two target visual symbols to be matched with the remaining five symbols. Visual discrimination, you have to discriminate, for example, in this item, the participant in the second row, the participant failed to discriminate the symbol and incorrectly put a tick mark on this symbol. So visual discrimination is also involved, and definitely ability to pay attention and concentration is involved in this. So these cognitive functions or abilities are largely measured by symbol search. Now, coming to the influences that can change the subtest score on symbol search includes anxiety, distractibility, learning disabilities or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the level of motivation, obsessive concerns with accuracy and detail. There are many people who are very obsessed for the accuracy and details, persistence in responding, visual perceptual problems if they are present. So if there is any visual deficit or defect, this task may be adversely influenced. And since it is time test, working under time pressure is another factor that can influence the subtest. Before interpreting clinically the test performance, the first thing is to rule out before any interpretation that a low symbol search is not because of the visual perceptual problems. So visual impairment is not involved, because if visual impairment is involved, we cannot infer for sure that how far the low score is because of cognitive impairment and how far because of it is visual impairment. So in absence of visual impairment, if the symbol search scores are lower, then they may have some clinical or psychological significance. For example, the ability for concentration, distractibility, obsessive concerns with details, impulsiveness, motivation level, anxiety. These are some of the core factors that may be linked with the performance on symbol search. Another thing is that this is again qualitative analysis. If you are observing during the test performance that the participant is repeatedly referring back and forth between the target symbols and the search symbols, this indicate poor visual memory. Or the other interpretation is also likely, so we will have to be very cautious in making this interpretation. The other likely interpretation is that because of insecurity, that whether the response will be correct or incorrect, this insecurity feeling may also give rise to this type of behavior, that is referring back and forth between the symbols. So these are a few indicators. There are many more. Another core test of this processing speed index is coding. In coding, the individual has to, or the participant or examinee has to copy very simple symbols in the given space as quickly as possible based on a key that pairs numbers with the symbol. Generally, numbers 1 to 9 are written, and for each number, a symbol is assigned. For example, is symbol of is equal to dollar, hash, etc. These are some examples that I am giving. I will show you the real example. And the participant has to copy the codes in the provided blank. So there will be one key that will pair each number with symbols, and then there will be a blank space in which they have to copy the symbols, the codes in the against the numbers in the blank space. This is the test. For example, you can see the one is associated with this dash, this inverted T is associated with 2, this reverse direction C is associated with 3, this L is associated with 4, U is associated with 5, O is associated with 6, this caret sign is associated with 7, the multiplication sign or X is associated with 8 and is equal to sign is associated with 9. Now, based on this, you will find that these are the numbers and they are not in the same sequence 1, 2, 3, 2, 4, 8, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1 like this. And you have to copy these symbols. So for 2 you will have to copy this, for 4 you will copy this. So this requires the involvement of memory also, but the task is very simple because this involves very simple symbols and the participant has to copy as many symbols as possible, again within 120 seconds, means within 2 minutes. And this task measures the visuomotor processing speed, short-term visual memory, learning ability, cognitive flexibility, attention, concentration, and motivation. As far as the factors influencing this subtest score is concerned, again, they are very similar to the first one: anxiety, distractibility, learning disability, ADHD, motivational level. The same factors that I showed you with the other task. Similar to that, visual or motor impairment is required to be ruled out before making any clinical interpretation of a low score on this test. If there is no visual or motor impairment, and even then the participant is scoring low, then it is likely to have some clinical or diagnostic significance. And a very judicious, very intelligent observation is required for interpreting scores on this test. And the few points that should be taken into account in interpreting this score includes the coordination, that is the grip on the pencil. A very hard grip on the pencil may indicate some psychological issues. Similarly, attention, concentration, distractibility, motivation level, these are the factors that I mentioned. This will also be reflected in the test performance. We will have to be watchful, keen, and make note of all these things. Visual perceptual problems are generally evident on this in terms of rotation of the symbols. For example, in place of writing U, the participant has written inverted U. So changing the orientation, rotation of the symbols, or drawing the symbols in a distorted manner is of clinical significance, and it may indicate some visual perceptual problem within the individual. Similarly, perseveration is also a common observation in clinical cases. The pathological participants having some sort of pathology or brain damage, they may copy the same symbol for a whole line. So say inverted U for whole all the numbers they have written there. Then in this second they have chosen some another symbol or the same symbol and repeating the same symbol. This is showing perseveration, and perseveration is always indication of some sort of pathology and maybe some severe psychopathology. And similarly, anxiety also influences the performance. If an individual is very anxious, his or her speed is likely to be compromised. Another factor, as I mentioned earlier, that short term visual memory is required to complete this task efficiently and quickly. So, any short term visual memory deficit will also be reflected on this, and the general observation of the examiner that if the participant is referring back and forth in copying the symbols, he is referring to the key and then copying the symbols again, going back to the key and copying the symbols. So going back and forth between the symbols and the writing suggests that he is not able to retain in the memory all the symbols, and therefore the visual short-term memory deficit may be inferred based on this type of behavior. Remember, this is again a qualitative observation and not any quantitative score-based indicator. Contrary to this, who have good memory, who have memorized all or several pairs of symbols, are likely to have good visual memory provided they have scored good, means they have made fewer errors in making their response. So these are some factors which we can consider for clinical interpretation on this coding. Cancellation, as you know, is the supplemental subtest, and You will be able to recall many cancellation tests like number cancellation tests. A lot of numbers are written in a row, and suppose you are asked to cancel out, cross out the numbers, say 9 and 6. Similar to that is this cancellation task, but this cancellation is a visual cancellation task in which some specific colored shapes are presented and a large array of color shapes are there, and the participant has to cancel out those two target symbols which are in different colors and shapes in the array or in the series of rows of different colored shapes. Some of the shapes will be similar to the target symbols and some will be different. The different symbols has to be excluded, and the participant has to cancel out, cross out only those symbols which are matching to the target symbol. And both items are administered to an individual. There are two items, and each item has a time limit of 45 seconds. And this test, one thing you should know, that this was designed as a new test to match with WAIS fourth edition. But the main difference is that for children, the symbols include the figures of animals, but here for adults, some geometrical shapes are used. So, in this example, you will be able to see, for example, there is a red rectangle, you may say, and yellow triangle, and the participant has to cross out if the red rectangle and yellow triangle is present. For example, in this row, there is one yellow triangle, you will have to cancel out this. So in this, you will cancel out this. In this, you will cancel out this. So you will put a cross mark. This is the test. And this test also measures the visual motor processing speed, the visual selective attention, because we have to selectively focus on the target and ignore rest of the distractors. So it measures selective attention as well as visual neglect. Factors that can influence the test performance include attention span, ability for concentration, distractibility, visual acuity. If visual acuity is not good, the performance may be impaired. Reflectivity and impulsivity, planning, and ability to perform under time pressure. Why? Because it is a time test. As far as the clinical consideration is considered, the first and most important thing to remember is that this will be the last subtest to be administered in the series of a lot of tests. So fatigue and boredom is likely to influence the performance on this speed task. So we must rule out the effect of fatigue and boredom before making any potential clinical or diagnostic interpretations. On this test, the keen observation may reflect the presence of anxiety, for example, shaking of hands, a tight pencil grip, or pressure on the paper while crossing or writing could be an indicator of nervousness and anxiety. Similarly, the impulsivity can be inferred based on the pace of response. Very quick, careless responding relate to perfectionism, uh, and perfectionism is related with slower and more careful responding. Thus, inconsistent responding or an inconsistent response rate across two items, as I said, there are two items, it may be indicative of difficulties in sustaining attention or difficulty in concentration. Similarly, the impaired executive functioning may also lower the task performance on this test. So, cancellation is the last test of this scale, which is called processing speed scale or the processing speed index. Now, before ending, I will discuss the process scores. In the Wessler Adult Intelligence Scale 4th edition, process scores have been suggested for three tasks: the block design, as you will be able to recall from previous lecture, that we also score for in the standard scoring it is not there, but for process score we calculate a score for black design based on no time bonus. Similarly, for digit span, the digit span forward, digit span backward, and digit span sequencing, they are the standard test. And we also score for the longest digit span forward, the longest digit span backward, the longest digit span sequence. And similarly, in letter number sequencing, the longest letter number sequence is also recorded just for making some clinical inference or extracting some diagnostically useful information. I will present a few examples for block design and digit span here. The diagnostic significance. For example, the block design with no time bonus is compared to the usual standard block design scoring to assess how and to what extent the performance has been influenced by the speed factor or because of some cognitive difficulty, particularly the visual constructive abilities. For example, some individuals may have intact visual constructive abilities but may score low on block design, the standard block design scoring test, because of several reasons. For example, Leukosis problem solving style may result in lower score. Slow cognitive processing is another factor. Similarly, some sort of physical difficulties in crossing or writing may result in lower score. In this condition, it is very likely that the score on no time bonus block design score will be greater than the standard block design where time bonus is given. So, with this comparison, we can infer how far it is because of this time pressure or some sort of physical difficulty or cognitive processing slowness, and how far it is because of visual constructive abilities. But remember that no time bonus definitely reduces the impact of time pressure on performance, but it does not completely eliminate it because the psychological factor of time pressure may be present even when the individual is performing the task, having in mind that the task has to be performed in the given time limit. Coming to the another task and the process score, the digit span. So it has been noted that DSF, the digit span forward, it is fairly stable because it resists the impact of cognitive deterioration. So cognitive impairment is not very easily detected on digit span forward. However, digit span backward and digit span sequencing require more concentration, more attention, and the ability to manipulate numbers and more working memory demand, and thus it is more sensitive to cognitive impairments. For instance, if digit span backward is much lower than digit span forward, it may be indicative of cognitive deterioration related to poor attention, sequencing, chunking, and visualizing the numbers. Similarly, a significantly lower score on digit span sequencing than the overall digit span may also reflect deterioration in attention, sequencing, chunking, and visualizing numbers. The digit span backward and digit span sequencing are generally more sensitive to brain injured cases, patients with brain injury, because such patients generally score very low on these two tests when the scores are compared with the overall score on the digit span subtest. And this fact has been noted by Wessler himself in 2008. So, apart from all the individual subtests and their clinical significance, there are some provisions in WAIS-IV for process scores also, and these process score may also provide some clinically useful information. In the next lecture, I will present the clinical significance of the scatter or difference between the various subscale scores. For example, difference in verbal comprehension index and perceptual reasoning index and their clinical significance, as well as the diagnostic indicators based on WAIS-IV scores for various clinical conditions. Largely, I will focus on brain damage patients and learning disability. So, thank you very much for attending this whole lecture series. The next and the last lecture on this will cover the diagnostic indicators of some clinical conditions and the significance, clinical significance of some of the uh, composite scores that I have not yet introduced to you, and scatter in the scale level scores like difference in VCI and PRI. Thank you very much.